All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to psychology. This is lesson 9 for semester 2 in psychology, and we are going to be talking this lesson about group interaction. Last lesson, lesson 8, you may recall we were talking about individual interaction, kind of how people respond to one or two people, small friendships, relationships, things of that sort. Now we're going to talk about how people interact in larger settings, and the definition of that is a group. So that's going to be our conversation for this lesson. Our spotlight this time is going to be something called groupthink. Groupthink is a word that was put together to kind of describe a very interesting little dynamic that occurs when groups of people come together. And oftentimes we think of groups as the strength is in numbers. We oftentimes say it's, the larger the numbers are better than the individual. And, one of the reasons why we work in groups is because we can get good ideas across the board. And generally that holds true. The concept of groupthink, though, says that sometimes that does not occur. And sometimes people are less in a group because of some very interesting dynamics that occur. And we'll talk about that throughout this lesson. But specifically for groupthink, it's defined as the desire to conform leading to poor decisions or outcomes. So we want so much to be part of the group, to be thought of as a cohesive and whole, that sometimes we actually make bad decisions because of it. And this has happened in government, it's happened in war, it's happened in the world of business, when sometimes the power of the group is subverted by our desire to conform. Some of the symptoms, some of the things we see when we have groupthink going on is an illusion of invulnerability. So that this group is so smart and so capable that nothing could possibly be a bad determination. And that's bad, that when you get to a point where your ego is that solid as a group, then you can't think about maybe the negative or a different way of thinking, and that leads to some problems. There's also usually a belief in the morality of the cause. So whatever the group believes in is thought to be universally believed in. And sometimes that's a very dangerous thing, to assume that others believe the same way that you do. Usually groupthink involves the development of an enemy. There's us and there's them. And as long as we stay together, cohesive as a group, conforming, then we're fighting them. Sometimes there's no them. Sometimes there's not an enemy. But that's one of the reasons we can get sucked into this idea of groupthink. And then there's lots of pressure put on dissenters. So anybody that has an idea that's outside of the norm, outside of the group, is very quickly put a lot of pressure on to get back into conformity. That is also, groups need to have people thinking outside of the box and outside of the design of the group to be effective. So what are some remedies where groups can make sure that this does not happen to them? One is having a devil's advocate, somebody that can think on the other side and take a look at the issue that's being discussed and talk about the other side of things. And sometimes that spurs thinking and gets things moving. And bringing in outside opinions from people that are not part of the group to share with the group can be effective as well. And oftentimes in the world of business especially, this is now occurring, where in groups that are designing new products or advertisements, they're bringing in people from the outside just to make sure that they have that voice recognized as well. So let's talk a little bit about what a group is. It seems like a strange thing to have to define. We really know kind of what a group is. It's a large group, a large collection of people. But there's a little bit more that makes a group, and that is that the collection of people has to have a common interest and goals. So if you just have a large group of people with no common interest, let's say a large group of people sitting at Southwest waiting to get on a plane, that's not a group. That's just a collection of human beings. But what makes a group special is when they have the common interests and goals. And the picture here on this particular slide is a group of people who have a common interest for the University of Oregon. You can see them there cheering for that fine institution, the University of Oregon. And their goal obviously is for Oregon to do well. And so we have something that's cohesive, something that's bringing this group together, is that they're all fans of the University of Oregon. Members of a group have to also interact and communicate with each other. There has to be some level, both either formally or informally, that we're identifying and communicating with each other for a group to actually be dynamic. There's a couple different types of groups. One would be a primary group. And primary group you want to think of as this is a group of people you have daily interaction with. So your family, your very close friends. At a traditional school, maybe your classmates that were very close in a particular grade that you'd gone through. That would be a primary group. These are people that you're interacting with in a group dynamic daily. If you're on a sports team, that's another example of that. A secondary group would be people that you interact with, but it's impersonal. So again, back to the example of the Duck fans. You got 47,000 people in a stadium. That's pretty impersonal, but we're all there for something specific. It's a group, but it's certainly a secondary group. When a group forms, you have roles or jobs that are taken on. And these can be either formal or informal. Now, probably some of you, especially if you were ever at a traditional elementary or middle school, were involved in defined groups where the group roles were defined, and you were either a leader, or you were a recorder, or you were a organizer, or something, where you literally had a role defined to you either by the teacher or by the group, so that everything would work smoothly. And sometimes that happens. That happens in the world of business and things like that. But oftentimes those roles are fairly informal, and they happen kind of over the course of everybody understanding each other within the group. So a role is nothing more than the expected behavior within the group. So let's say you're in your group of friends, and you are just kind of the leader. You're the one that makes the decisions. You're the ones that puts everybody in the right direction. You decide what you're going to do for the evening, whatever it is. Your role is the leader, and the rest of the group probably looks to you to be the one who's making the decisions. Maybe your role is the joker. You're the one who's always making the joke. You're the funny one. You've got something to say about everything, and that's your role. So when you show up, everybody kind of expects that that's what you're going to contribute to the group dynamic. Those can change. They can modify, and your role in one group may be very different than your role in another group. But it's usually based on the skill set that you bring to the group. And then usually every group also has to have some sort of a leader. And the leader is the person who really embodies the ideals of the group and the ideas of the group to the outside. So if someone comes from the outside, they're the ones that are discussing what's going on, what's the dynamic happening with this particular group. Leadership styles. We talked about a leader in the last slide. Leadership styles can be very different within each group, and it depends a little bit on what the group is. If the group is a collection of friends that just get together, then probably you don't have a really well-defined leader in the same way you would if you are at a school or you're at a business or something like that. But generally, most leadership styles can be boiled down into three ways. One is called the authoritarian. Authoritarian is that leader it's my way or the highway. There's no discussion. I've made a decision, and I demand obedience from the people that follow me. The military might be considered that. That's a good example in the United States. Or somebody who is a dictator in another country might be thought of as an authoritarian leader. There's one called laissez-faire. That's a French word, which really means that they're not particularly involved. They lead in name only, but they're really encouraging the group to make the decisions. So they'll be involved. Maybe they push things in the right direction, but they're letting the group really make the decisions. And then the third one, which is a little bit in the middle, is the democratic. And democratic sounds like something that deals with politics, but it really just deals with the fact of the leader encouraging the group members to interact and make a decision by consensus. So something where we can all agree on. And maybe we have to give a little and take a little as we do it, but when we're done, everybody has a sort of something that they want. And that would be a democratic leadership style. So you can think about, your interaction with your friends, your interaction maybe at work, if you work, things like that, and think about, who in your life, your parents, your boss, your principal, and others, and what is their style of leadership. Conformity. Conformity is really important in a group. A group is kind of defined by conformity. And to be a conformist or to conform sometimes has a negative connotation. It sounds negative, like, oh, geez, I'm just doing what everybody else does. But, there is a need to conform within a group so that everybody can get a little bit of what they want, and we can all move in the same direction. So, it is due to group pressure One conforms based on group pressure, but it doesn't have to be a negative group pressure. Sometimes we think of peer pressure, making decisions that are bad because someone has kind of pushed you or some group has pushed you into it. You don't want to do this particular activity, but they push you into it, and there's some negative consequences. We think of that as peer pressure. But sometimes group pressure can be good. It can be good. It can push you beyond where you think you're able to go. It can be towards making good decisions, those type of things. So conformity is not necessarily a bad thing. Lots of people feel like they're nonconformists and they refuse to go along with the group. I always find it interesting because a lot of times they'll find a group of other nonconformists. So here's a group of people that want to be thought of as different, all being different together. It's kind of an interesting oxymoron. Children are taught to conform to gain acceptance, and so conformity is kind of built into our dynamic, the way that we interact with people, that, you know, to be accepted, and that's really important to kids and especially to adolescents, one conforms to kind of the will of the greater society. And conformity and obedience are similar. Obedience to authority is another dynamic that one would see in a group. Obedience is a behavior, as it says, that's a response to an order given by somebody who is defined as an authority. And we define authorities in a lot of different ways in our society. We look at, you know, people that maybe have a little bit more power than us, people that we've learned from childhood to be either fearful or worried about, or that, you know, we need to respect. So the picture here is of a drill sergeant talking to a private. This could be a teacher, it could be a parent, it could be a boss. All those are authority figures, and we are taught, we are socialized to obey the authority figures in our society. And a little bit is required. A little obedience is required. If we didn't have people, you know, obeying a stop sign or stoplights or things of that sort, we would have chaos. We'd have anarchy, and most people don't want to live in a world of anarchy. And so obedience actually is something where we decide for the greater good, we have to do this. And for our self-interest, we have to do this too. If I want to keep this job, even though I don't maybe like my boss, the boss is the one who ultimately cuts me the paycheck, so I got to do what he says or she says. And so that's kind of the concept of obedience. And again, obedience is also something that can be positive or negative. You know, your obedience to, as I said, your parents maybe gets you the ability to go out a little bit later or have a car or whatever. If you are not obeying, then there's going to be negative consequences. If you do that to a police officer, you find yourself in jail. So there's all kinds of things like that that we decide how and when and how much to obey, but generally most of us have been socialized to do that. One of the interesting things about a group dynamic is sometimes groups can kind of take over our individuality. We become sucked into the group, and the dynamic of the group becomes our own. And so things that we maybe wouldn't even do ourselves, we're doing because it's the will of the group. And we think about that. You saw that in part of the lesson that we did this week, or you will see it. And we also see it all over the place. Most recently in Ferguson, you know, we saw the rioting and looting that occurred after the grand jury made their decision in Ferguson, and people were very frustrated. And because of that anger and because of the group growing with that common anger, people were doing things that they normally wouldn't do: looting stores, turning over police cars, you know, maybe engaging in fighting, setting fires to things. Those are behaviors that most people would not do individually, but the group dynamic supersedes that. This picture here is actually not of something like Ferguson. This is taken in Vancouver, Canada, a few years ago, and the city went crazy after their hockey team, the Vancouver Canucks, lost the Stanley Cup. And so it doesn't have to be something as powerful as a grand jury decision or life or death decisions. This was about sports, and people can get just as caught up in a sporting event as they can other things and make bad decisions. And really, so this concept is called de-individuation. And de-individuation is when people lose that sense of self and follow the group behaviors. It's also called the mob mentality or rule of the mob a lot of times, and you'll learn more about that in this particular lesson. And really what happens is that people who have a strong sense of ethics and morals, what's right and wrong, and a guilt if they are not conforming to their sense of right and wrong, those are lessened because they have a sense of anonymity. If I'm in a group, people don't know who I am, and they don't know what I'm doing, and I have the ability to kind of just blend in, and so sometimes things that wouldn't happen individually happen because of that. So that's a little bit about group dynamics, group interaction, and once you're done with this, please go ahead and you're going to read the chapter, and we'll talk to you a little bit more next time.